You never know when a split-second decision will rewrite your destiny. When a struggling waitress stepped between two desperate thieves and a notorious outlaw biker's prized Harley, she didn't expect to survive the night. What happened next wasn't retaliation. It was a miracle that will absolutely break your heart. The neon sign above Sam's All-Night Diner on the outskirts of Bakersfield, California, had a busted N, making it bleed a harsh, buzzing pink light into the desolate parking lot. It was 2:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of dead hour where the world feels completely abandoned. Inside, the air smelled heavily of burnt filter coffee, stale grease, and industrial bleach. For 28-year-old Rebecca Lawson, this diner was her entire universe, her purgatory, and her only lifeline. Rebecca was a single mother hanging on to survival by the frayed threads of a minimum wage paycheck. Underneath her faded, mustard yellow uniform, her shoulders ached from a double shift, but physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the crushing weight of her reality. In the back booth, hidden away from the few weary truckers nursing their coffees, her 6-year-old son, Leo, was fast asleep on a makeshift bed of winter coats. His chest rose and fell with a shallow, wheezing rhythm that terrified her. Leo had severe, chronic asthma, and his prescription inhalers ran close to $300 a month. Her ex-husband, a ghost of a man who had drained their meager savings account 2 years prior, was nowhere to be found. Rebecca had exactly $42 in her checking account. The eviction notice taped to her apartment door back in town had given her exactly 5 days to come up with $800. Every time she wiped down a sticky laminate table, her mind spiraled into a dark panic. She was running out of time, running out of money, and running out of hope. Then, the low, earth-shaking rumble of a heavy V-twin engine shattered the quiet of the night. The vibration rattled the diner's front windows before the motorcycle even pulled into the lot. Rebecca looked up from the counter. Gliding beneath the flickering neon light was a stunning, custom 1947 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead. It was painted a deep, abyssal midnight blue, adorned with subtle, masterfully airbrushed, silver ghost flames. The chrome was so meticulously polished, it looked like liquid mirrors in the dark. It wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a museum-quality piece of rolling art, dripping with raw, mechanical menace. The rider cut the engine. The sudden silence in the diner was palpable. The two truckers at the counter stopped mid-conversation, staring out the window. The man who dismounted was a mountain of a human being. He stood at least 6'4", with shoulders broad enough to block out the streetlights. He wore heavy, scuffed engineer boots, faded denim, and a thick leather cut over a black hoodie. As he turned toward the diner's entrance, the overhead light caught the massive patch on his back, the unmistakable, notorious, winged death head. Above it, the curved top rocker read, Hell's Angels, and the bottom rocker boldly stated, California. The small, rectangular MC patch sat off to the side, completing the insignia of one of the most feared outlaw motorcycle clubs in the world. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful, innocent sound that starkly contrasted with the intimidating figure stepping over the threshold. His face was weathered, lined with the kind of deep grooves that only come from decades of riding hard into the wind. A thick, graying beard hid most of his jaw, and a long, jagged scar hooked across his left cheekbone. His eyes, dark and unreadable, scanned the diner in a fraction of a second. Everyone looked down, suddenly, incredibly interested in their hash browns. Rebecca swallowed hard, wiping her hands on her apron, and stepped out from behind the counter. She had worked the graveyard shift long enough to know the golden rule of surviving the night. Treat everyone exactly the same, whether they are a cop, a drifter, or an outlaw. Booth or counter, sir? She asked. Her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. The biker looked down at her. Booth, corner, he rumbled. His voice sounded like gravel grinding in a cement mixer. He walked past her, his heavy boots thudding against the linoleum, and slid into the booth directly opposite the one where Leo was sleeping. He placed a thick, leather-gloved hand on the table. Black coffee. A plate of whatever meat you've got back there, burnt to a crisp. Yes, sir. Coming right up, Rebecca nodded, grabbing a fresh mug. As she poured his coffee, she covertly glanced at his leather vest. The name stitched over his chest read Rooster. David Rooster Henderson was a seasoned veteran of the club, a man whose reputation in the California underworld was forged in steel and silence. But to Rebecca, tonight, he was just another paying customer. When she brought his plate of overwell steaks and eggs, she noticed something unexpected. Resting on the table beside his massive helmet was a small, dog-eared photograph. It was faded, showing a much younger Rooster holding a tiny baby wrapped in a pink blanket. His thumb was gently rubbing the edge of the picture. For a split second, the hardened outlaw looked impossibly fragile. "Your total is $14.50, Rebecca said quietly, pretending not to see the photograph. Rooster snapped out of his trance, pulling a worn leather wallet from his chain. He dropped a crisp $50 bill on the table. "Keep it." "Sir, I can't keep a $35 tip," she said, her desperate financial situation instantly warring with her pride. He didn't look up from his plate. "I said keep it, waitress. Go buy the kid over there a proper blanket." He nodded toward the back booth where Leo was tossing and turning in his sleep. Rebecca felt a sudden lump in her throat. "Thank you, truly." She walked back to the counter, her fingers trembling as she slipped the bill into her apron. It wasn't enough to save her from eviction, but it was enough to buy Leo's medication tomorrow. For the first time all week, a tiny sliver of relief pierced her overwhelming despair. But the quiet of the graveyard shift is a fragile, deceitful thing. And outside in the dark, trouble had just arrived. Rebecca was in the back, loading the dishwasher, when she heard the distinct, screeching protest of failing brakes. She walked over to the greasy drive-through window and peered out into the gloomy parking lot. A rusted, dented Ford F-150 flatbed had just pulled up, parking illegally close to the diner's entrance, directly parallel to Rooster's gleaming Harley-Davidson. The truck's headlights were killed immediately, plunging that section of the lot into deep shadows. Two men jumped out of the truck cab. Even from a distance, Rebecca could read their frantic, twitchy body language. They were rail-thin, wearing baggy clothes, their heads darting left and right with the erratic paranoia of severe meth addicts. One of them, a guy with a shaved head and a neck tattoo, went straight to the back of the flatbed and pulled out a heavy wooden plank. The other man pulled a massive pair of bright yellow bolt cutters from his jacket. Rebecca's heart slammed against her ribs. They're going for the bike. She knew what kind of men stole motorcycles. They were desperate, dangerous, and usually armed. But stealing a customized Harley that belonged to a fully patched Hell's Angel? That wasn't just grand theft. That was a profound, catastrophic death wish. If Rooster walked out and caught them, the violence that would erupt in Sam's Diner parking lot would make the local news for weeks. The diner would be a crime scene. She would lose her job, the only thing keeping her and Leo off the literal streets. She turned to rush into the dining area to warn Rooster, but when she burst through the swinging kitchen doors, the corner booth was empty. The restroom door down the hall was shut. Rebecca looked back out the window. The thieves were already moving. The shaved-head guy had wedged the plank against the truck bed, while the other man was creeping toward the Harley, examining the heavy lock chained through the front wheel. They had less than 60 seconds before they loaded the bike and vanished. Rational thought completely abandoned Rebecca. It wasn't just about the diner, or her job, or even the terrifying biker currently in the bathroom. It was a lifetime of watching things get taken from her. Her husband taking their savings, landlords taking her security, life taking her son's health. She was so incredibly, violently tired of watching people take what didn't belong to them while the victims just stood by and suffered. Without thinking, Rebecca grabbed the heavy, solid iron tire iron that Sam kept propped next to the back door for breaking up ice in the winter. Her fingers gripped the cold metal so tightly, her knuckles turned white. She pushed open the heavy glass doors of the diner and sprinted out into the chill night air. "Hey!" Rebecca screamed, her voice cracking like a whip across the empty lot. "Get the hell away from that bike!" The two thieves jumped, dropping the bolt cutters with a loud metallic clatter. They spun around, expecting to see a massive biker. Instead, they saw a 5'4" waitress in a yellow apron wielding a rusty iron bar. The initial shock on their faces quickly morphed into ugly, contemptuous smirks. "Back inside, sweetheart," the tattooed man sneered, stepping away from the motorcycle and towards her. "This ain't your business. Go pour some coffee before you get hurt." "I said back away," Rebecca shouted, planting her feet. Her whole body was shaking with adrenaline, but she didn't step back. She positioned herself squarely between the men and the Harley. "Do you have any idea whose bike this is? You touch this, you're dead men." The second man, a strung-out looking guy with greasy hair, let out a raspy laugh. "It's gonna be our bike in about 30 seconds. Now move, bitch, before I make you move." He lunged forward, trying to shove her out of the way to get to the handlebars. Instinct took over. Rebecca swung the tire iron in a short, brutal arc. The heavy iron connected solidly with the man's forearm with a sickening crack. He howled in pain, stumbling backward and clutching his arm. "She broke my arm. The crazy bitch broke my arm." The tattooed man's eyes went wide with sudden rage. The smugness vanished, replaced by the lethal, unpredictable violence of a cornered addict. He reached into his baggy jacket and pulled out a switchblade. With a metallic snick, a 4-inch jagged blade locked into place. It glinted ominously in the buzzing neon light of the diner sign. "You're gonna regret that, you stupid little girl," he hissed, taking a slow, menacing step toward her. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. The reality of her foolish bravery crashed down on her. She was a mother. If she died in this filthy parking lot over a stranger's motorcycle, who was going to take care of Leo? The image of her son, sleeping soundly in the booth just 30 feet away, flashed brilliantly in her mind. She raised the tire iron defensively, but her hands were trembling violently now. The man lunged. Rebecca swung blindly, but he was faster. He ducked under the iron bar and slashed out with the knife. Rebecca twisted her body, but she wasn't fast enough. The blade sliced through the sleeve of her uniform and bit deep into the flesh of her left forearm. A sharp, searing heat tore through her arm. Rebecca gasped, stumbling backward against the leather seat of the knucklehead. Blood immediately began soaking through the cheap mustard fabric, dripping down her hand and splattering onto the pristine chrome pipes of the motorcycle. "Now," the tattooed man growled, stepping in close. The bloody knife raised for a second. Fatal strike. "Drop the pipe." Rebecca closed her eyes, bracing for the impact, praying someone would find Leo in the booth. But the strike never came. Instead, the heavy glass door of the diner exploded open with such violent force that it shattered against the exterior brick wall, showering the pavement in 1,000 glittering pieces. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" The roar was so loud, so impossibly deep and filled with such raw, primal fury, that it felt like a physical shockwave hitting the parking lot. The thief froze, the knife trembling in his hand as he looked past Rebecca. Standing in the doorway, framed by the harsh fluorescent lights of the diner, was Rooster. He had taken off his hoodie. His massive, heavily tattooed arms were corded with muscle. His eyes, previously unreadable and quiet, were now burning with a terrifying, murderous rage. He took one look at his motorcycle, the Thieves' flatbed truck, and finally, the bleeding waitress standing protectively in front of his chrome, clutching a tire iron. The silence that followed was suffocating. It was the heavy, terrifying silence of a predator right before the kill. Rooster stepped off the curb, his heavy boots crushing the broken glass beneath his feet. The air in the parking lot suddenly felt thick, heavy with the promise of absolute destruction. Rooster didn't run. He didn't need to. He stalked forward with the terrifying, deliberate momentum of a freight train. The tattooed thief, realizing too late that his smug confidence was a fatal error, panicked. He thrust the bloody switchblade toward the advancing giant. "Stay back, old man. I'll cut you wide open." Rooster didn't even blink. When the knife lunged, the Hell's Angel moved with a terrifying speed that defied his massive frame. His heavy, leather-clad hand shot out, grabbing the thief's wrist. There was no struggle, just a sickening, distinct snap that echoed off the brick walls of the diner. The thief screamed, a high, piercing sound of sheer agony as the switchblade clattered onto the asphalt. Before the man could draw another breath, Rooster drove a devastating right hook into his ribs. The impact sounded like a baseball bat hitting a side of beef. The tattooed man collapsed instantly, curling into a whimpering, broken ball on the wet pavement. The second thief, the one nursing a fractured arm from Rebecca's tire iron, took one look at his partner and the monster standing over him. He scrambled into the cab of the rusted Ford, threw it into drive, and stomped on the gas, abandoning his friend without a second glance. The flatbed screeched out of the lot, disappearing into the Bakersfield night. Rooster ignored the fleeing truck. He stood over the writhing man on the ground, his heavy boot pressing lightly against the man's throat. "If I ever see your face in this county again," Rooster growled, his voice a low, vibrating hum of pure menace, "they won't find enough of you to fill a shoebox. Understand?" The thief choked out a frantic, sobbing sound of agreement. Rooster kicked him away in disgust. Only then did the biker turn his attention to the woman leaning heavily against his 1,947 knucklehead. Rebecca was pale, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, sweeping shock. The left sleeve of her mustard uniform was soaked in dark crimson, the blood dripping steadily off her fingertips and pooling onto the toe of her sneakers. She looked up at the towering outlaw, her grip still white-knuckled around the bloody tire iron. "You're bleeding on my chrome," Rooster said. His tone was rough, but the murderous fire in his eyes had completely vanished, replaced by a sharp, calculating focus. I'm sorry," Rebecca stammered, her vision blurring at the edges. Her knees suddenly buckled. Rooster caught her before she hit the ground. His massive hands, which had just casually shattered a man's wrist, were surprisingly gentle as they supported her weight. He stripped off his heavy leather cut, revealing the iconic death head patch, and tossed it over the seat of the bike. Then, he tore the sleeve of his black hoodie, wrapping the thick cotton tightly around her lacerated arm to fashion a crude tourniquet. "Why did you do that?" Rooster asked. His brow furrowed as he pulled the knot tight, ignoring her wince of pain. "It's just a machine. You could have been killed over a piece of steel." It's all I have," Rebecca whispered, her teeth chattering from the shock. "My job. Sam would fire me. The diner, if it becomes a crime scene." She swallowed hard, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. "My son, Leo, he's inside." Rooster's head snapped toward the shattered diner doors. He remembered the wheezing little boy sleeping in the booth. "Stay here," Rooster commanded. He pulled out a heavy, blocky cell phone and dialed a number. "Yeah, it's Rooster. I'm at the diner on Highway 99. Send a prospect down here with a truck to watch my bike." Now, he hung up, scooped Rebecca up into his arms as effortlessly as if she were a child, and carried her back into the diner. He set her down gently in a booth, then walked over to the back corner. Little Leo, miraculously undisturbed by the shouting and breaking glass, was still sleeping under his pile of winter coats, his breathing ragged and labored. When the paramedics arrived 10 minutes later, they found a bizarre scene. A badly bleeding waitress, a shattered storefront, and a terrifying, legendary outlaw biker sitting in a booth, carefully holding a sleeping 6-year-old boy wrapped in a pink blanket so the mother could get her arm bandaged. As they loaded Rebecca onto the gurney, she panicked, reaching out for her son. "I can't afford an ambulance. Please, I can't pay for this." "I'm riding in the back with the kid," Rooster told the lead EMT, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. He looked down at Rebecca, his scarred face impassive. "Don't worry about the bill, kid. Just keep breathing." 5 days later, the reality of Rebecca's life came crashing down with absolute, merciless precision. Her left arm was stitched up and bound in thick white gauze. The diner's owner, terrified of the violence and the broken glass, had let her go over the phone, offering nothing but a half-hearted apology. The eviction notice taped to her apartment door had officially expired at 8 a.m. It was noon now. The sky over Bakersfield was a bruised, heavy gray. Rebecca sat on a taped-up cardboard box in the middle of her empty, dingy living room. Leo was sitting on a deflated air mattress beside her, playing quietly with a broken plastic fire truck. She had 2 suitcases, $38, and nowhere to go. The homeless shelter downtown had a 3-week waiting list. She buried her face in her good hand and wept. It was a silent, suffocating cry of total defeat. She had fought so hard, bled for what was right, and lost absolutely everything. Then, the floorboards of her apartment began to vibrate. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, before building into a deafening, unified roar of heavy, unbaffled exhaust pipes. The sound rattled the cheap window panes of her second-floor apartment. Leo dropped his truck, his eyes wide. "Mommy, what's that?" Rebecca wiped her eyes, wincing as her stitched arm throbbed, and walked over to the window. When she looked down into the cracked, weed-choked parking lot of her complex, her jaw dropped. There wasn't just one motorcycle. There were 30 of them. 30 custom Harley-Davidsons had completely taken over the lot, parked in a flawless, intimidating diagonal line. The riders were all dismounting, a sea of black leather, heavy boots, and the infamous winged death head patches of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. To the residents of the rundown apartment complex, it looked like a terrifying invasion. People were quickly drawing their blinds and locking their doors. Leading the pack, walking toward the concrete stairs, was Rooster. Next to him was an older, imposing man with silver hair and a sergeant-at-arms patch on his chest. A moment later, a heavy knock echoed on her door. Rebecca opened it slowly. Rooster stood in the hallway, taking off his sunglasses. He looked completely out of place in the cheap, peeling hallway of the apartment building. "Heard you were moving, Rebecca," Rooster said, his gravelly voice remarkably soft. "I don't have a choice," she replied, her voice trembling. "I lost my job. The landlord is locking the doors in an hour." Rooster reached into his leather cut and pulled out a thick, manila envelope. He held it out to her. "No, he's not." Rebecca hesitated, then took the envelope with her good hand. She opened the clasp. Inside was a stack of official documents. The first was a cashier's check made out to her local hospital, explicitly covering her ER visit and stitches. The second was a lease agreement for a beautiful 2-bedroom townhouse on the safe side of Bakersfield, fully paid up for 2 entire years. But it was the third piece of paper that made her breath catch. It was an appointment confirmation at the premier pediatric pulmonary clinic in Los Angeles, under the name Leo Lawson. Stamped across the top in red ink was "Paid in full, private beneficiary." I can't take this," Rebecca stammered, tears instantly flooding her vision. "This is tens of thousands of dollars. Why? Why are you doing this for me?" Rooster stepped inside the doorway, the heavy silence of the room stretching between them. He reached for his wallet, the thick chain clinking against his jeans, and pulled out the faded, dog-eared photograph he had been staring at in the diner. He handed it to her. Rebecca looked at the picture. It was the young Rooster, holding the baby in the pink blanket. "Her name was Sophie," Rooster said, his voice dropping to a raw, painful whisper. 30 years ago, I was just a dumb kid pushing brooms at a body shop. Didn't have 2 dimes to rub together. Sophie had lungs just like your boy." He paused, swallowing hard, his dark eyes glistening with a ghost of a memory he had carried for decades. "She had a severe attack one night. We didn't have insurance. I couldn't afford the right inhalers. We waited too long to take her to the emergency room because I was terrified of the bill." He looked past Rebecca, watching Leo play on the deflated mattress. "She died in my arms in the waiting room," Rooster said softly. "I let my daughter die because I was broke and scared. I spent the next 20 years angry at the world, taking it out on everyone, until the club gave me a place to put that rage." He stepped closer, looking deeply into Rebecca's tear-streaked face. "I sat in that diner and watched you, a mother with nothing but a few dollars to her name, step in front of a deadly blade to protect my machine so you could keep a minimum wage job to buy your boy medicine." Rooster pointed a heavy, scarred finger at her. "You bled for my colors that night, Rebecca. You stood your ground for me. In our world, you bleed for the club. The club bleeds for you. You and your boy are under our protection now. You will never, ever have to be afraid of a hospital bill or an eviction notice again." Rebecca broke down completely. She stepped forward, throwing her good arm around the giant, hardened outlaw, burying her face in his leather vest. Rooster stood perfectly still for a moment, then slowly brought his massive hand up to gently pat her back. Down in the parking lot, the roar of 30 Harley-Davidsons fired up in perfect, deafening unison, a heavy metal symphony, declaring to the world that a struggling mother and her little boy would never walk alone again. If this incredible, true-to-life story of sacrifice, unexpected brotherhood, and a mother's fierce love moved you, please hit that like button and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more gripping, real-life dramas where the most unlikely heroes step up when all hope seems lost. Drop a comment below. Would you have risked it all?